This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome everybody, you're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Woo! One more month to go, Shaw. I know you can hear me in the background because he's like amped up, ready to jump up in here. Sounds like we got a heck of a show going down, man, but so much is happening. There's still movements, being made before we even tip off the NBA season. So it's getting hot and heavy, man. And while all eyes are still focused, obviously, on the anticipation of NFL, beginning, look, everybody knows that basketball be holding it down, man. Basketball be holding it down. That's the real October magic, right? So in a month away, for all you NBA heads, man, we got some good things coming up. But let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC. My man continues to do big things. Mr. Warren Shaw repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holler back at me, Mr. Shaw. Woo! You getting that vibe, getting that fever, starting to run up pretty high, man. That basketball season is on the come up.
Yeah, I think that's well said, my dude. But as always, salute to all the fans and listeners of NBA Baseline. The basketball season is just around the corner. We got training camp a couple of weeks away, media day, all that stuff. So I can't wait to potentially head out there, see what's going on in the Miami area as always. But then, after that, basketball season will be here upon us. So a couple of things to discuss before we get to that time of the year, man. But I think it's going to be a great show, homie.
Definitely, man. So in a little bit, we for our conversation of the breakdown, my man Shaw picked up, he is always perusing the media outlets and found a very interesting article, which I think can be the base for our conversation for this week's show. We'll get into that in a moment. We're going to tease you. We're going to lead you slowly into it. But then also, in our subject of the drop, we're going to definitely talk about the illustrious career of Manu Ginobili. The Manu one. And then also an interesting trade that's taken place by the Houston Rockets, finally unloading a player that we felt like, man, you need to keep him or you need to let him go. And somehow they figured out a way to let Ryan Anderson go. So we'll talk a little bit about that trade. So a lot of stuff to get into, man. And once again, we always appreciate you and yours for tuning into the Baseline. Be sure to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. So once again, we always encourage you to download the platform. And if you like what you hear, throw on your headphones, throw on your ear pods, throw on your earbuds, whatever you use. Download us, allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. Once again, big shout outs to our people from Dash Radio, one of the premier online radio shows, and continually rising, holding it down with the Nothing But Net radio network. You can always catch the Baseline NBA podcast each and every single week exclusively on Dash Radio. You know how we do. You know how we roll. It's time now for the breakdown. Time to break it down. Time now for the breakdown. Callie Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. This week, our topic for the breakdown. But every now and again, and we don't actually get an opportunity to do this. Usually, Shaw and myself, we will come up with the topics for the week. Try to figure out an outline, something that may have been derived from NBA play or things that are happening in the association. Very seldomly, though, do we catch part of inspirations from other writers, from other articles that are being written, which you would think is probably the norm for most people who do shows. Well, my man Shaw came across a very interesting article, which I think can set the tone about another storyline that we would want to be looking into as we start getting closer to the NBA season, Shaw. I'm going to let you kind of roll out the intro on this one because I do believe and agree with you that this should be a very interesting topic of conversation to be had before we have NBA tip-off a month away.
Yeah, so the great outlet, Bleacher Report, they feature a lot of amazing NBA writers and talent. And one gentleman, Zach Buckley, you can follow him on Twitter. He wrote an article that says NBA's number one options who would be better served off as sidekicks. So basically saying guys who are feature players on their specific teams for whatever reason, whether that just be team dynamics, circumstances, trades, things that happen over the summer. Now they're the go-to guys. And he goes ahead and pegs 5 guys who he believes would actually be better off served as being maybe number 2 or even third options. one such player, which again I think direct result of that is in Kevin Love, obviously with LeBron James and Kyrie Irving both leaving in the last 2 seasons. That's just a matter of circumstance, not necessarily roster construction for the Cleveland Cavaliers. But I think it is an interesting article, and he lists 5 guys. We may have some other guys that we may even throw into the mixer a little bit as well too. But like I said, when you're looking at teams and you're looking at players, and this could rub some guys the wrong way, you know what I mean, if some of them were to read it.
Oh, you think?
But I think it's something to discuss.
Don't tell Blake Griffin this. Matter of fact, if you're listening, man, you could go ahead and turn off this show. I don't know if you're gonna agree or disagree with this, but you're gonna feel some kind of way. Or maybe if he hasn't seen the article, don't go there, man. You might start throwing out death threats to some of these writers.
But I mean, I'm sure Zach is safe, and Blake has learned his lessons from interacting kind of off the court. Don't want to get into anything there, my dude. But at the end of the day, this is a perfect conversation for me that I look at it, because I think I've been pegging a guy like Paul George in this role for a very, very long time. And now Paul George is not the number one option. He is, a sidekick, so to speak, for lack of a better phrase. And people can misinterpret that word a little bit, I think. So just saying number 2 as opposed to sidekick. But either way, he's somebody who I've always thought I didn't really like him as the feature guy, and now he's that in OKC.
So the interesting thing about this, Shaw, and listen, again, I agree with you. I think Zach put together a really great article, and again, to your point, I would encourage people to take a look at the article is actually, trying to convey as it relates to, what he sees from not just the player, but also the circumstance and the situation of where the organization is. Here's the thing that I find interesting about this article, and we can touch on each and every single one of the people that he's listed. He lists 5 players specifically, but I think it could be broadened. But I also think that the criteria also has to be looked at as well too. When you look at a person, let's stay on point with Kevin Love. I don't want to bounce around to too many people. When you look at a certain situation or circumstance like Kevin Love, part of me also wonders, when we use the word sidekick, are we talking about an accompanying player that facilitates and takes the burden off of what we always expect the superstar players to have to do or do easily, right? Because part of the connotation is, when you think of sidekicks, you always associate Scottie Pippen, right? But then we got to a point where we started labeling players as two-way players, right? I think when we started transitioning, in the past 2005, 2006, we stopped looking at certain players because of their marquee talent, because of where they were coming from, and we started labeling guys as 1A, 1B players. You know what I'm saying? A 2A, 2B player, that sort of thing. And I just kind of wondered that when we use the word sidekick and we put emphasis on that, are we talking about this in relation to the type of contributions that Scottie Pippen had made, for Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls when they were winning championship rings? Or are we talking about a 1A, 1B type player, type of thing? Because I think that gap that sits between the realm of our understanding between those also may factor in on how we perceive some of these players and where their roles are going to be for the teams that they're currently on now.
I think it's an interesting way to frame it for sure. And again, I'll have to go back to the Paul George example. I think he's kind of like a 1B. And I know there's semantics, when it comes to that. Because I said, I don't think it's a problem if Paul George is your leading scorer. But I just don't think I think it's an issue if he's like the guy that you have to rely on for everything. You know what I mean? In terms of the locker room presence, the leadership, all of those other things that kind of come along with being a number one option.
The intangibles. Right, exactly. That you would, the things that you would say, this is why he's a number one guy. Like we can easily put guys like James Harden, Russell Westbrook, obviously LeBron James, Steph Curry. We could put these guys in that, because the numbers and the accolades and what they do can kind of speak for themselves. But you could also you could kind of make the argument and say, should we consider Russell Westbrook a guy who has to, who needs a sidekick, or should he be a standalone? And look how long it took before we actually bought into the idea that James Harden truly should be a number one guy, rather than per se being a sidekick, right?
No, it makes perfect sense. I mean, again, you can go around the league and it's littered with people like that. Harden, even Kyrie Irving, obviously wanted to get out of LeBron's shadow, so to speak, in some ways. So when you go back to the situation, which you kind of iterated here with Kevin Love, he is a victim of circumstance. He was the number one option for years in Minnesota. That didn't play out well. They never made the playoffs. He wasn't successful, although he's putting up these monster numbers, 25, 12, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He was going crazy. And then became a complementary piece in Cleveland. Now it's going to be forced to be the feature piece. And we've talked about this already, but Cleveland very much in the situation that Miami was years ago when LeBron left as well, too. LeBron ended up leaving. So then they threw a bunch of money at Bosh and said, all right, well, you're going to kind of be the guy, and that we're going to try to build around in the interim time. And that was the same situation for Kevin Love right now. They're like, all right, well, he's gone. You're still here. Here's a bunch of money. See what you can do with it. And I don't know that, again, when the article kind of pegs him, it really is, again, it's more a victim of circumstance, because I don't think anybody feels like, okay, they should be building their team around Kevin Love. But Cleveland doesn't have much of a choice this upcoming season.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, getting in on our subject of the breakdown. Players who are number one options, who might be really secondary options or quote unquote sidekicks. So, all right. So let me ask you. Zach, he interestingly puts 5 players on here. DeMar DeRozan, Blake Griffin, Kevin Love, John Wall, and I'm losing the. I mentioned Kemba Walker, right?
Blake Griffin, yeah, Blake Griffin.
And Blake Griffin. Okay, so he mentions the 5 players here. I'm just curious, when after your read of this article, who falls most in line with the premise of what we're trying to, I guess, ascertain from what Zach was indicating in this article? Who do you think closely represents, based on their body of work and really what they have and haven't established, that they would be someone that's better off as being a secondary option or a sidekick to to a star player?
It's hard. I mean, I think the easiest option is Kevin Love, only because, again, we just kind of outlined that. So he's number one on the list. And again, he was a second and even a third option in some cases, and now kind of at the forefront. But of the other guys that he listed, I think it would probably be Blake. And that's more as a result of his career arch. Years ago, we were talking about Blake as a potential MVP candidate, all NBA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And while he's lived up to some of that, he's now out of LA. The dynamics of where he's at now in Detroit is very, very different as well. And just his skills are a little, I want to say diminished, but they're just not quite the same when he was at that MVP talk type level. So for me, he kind of stands out as the next guy. I was like, yeah, maybe if they had some other talent around him, some star level talent, a la, obviously when Chris Paul was at his peak as well too, that made more sense. And not to belabor it, but I feel like there's a couple of these guys on the list that it's interesting because they all kind of have to lead with the other player team. I look at DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge. DeMar came from a situation in Toronto where he was a co-leader really with Kyle Lowry, although DeMar took the lion's share and scored all the points, so to speak. He and Kyle were both kind of the leaders of that roster, and I think he's going to go in a situation where he's going to try to do that, but LaMarcus is not as willing to be that type of guy. But we'll see if the situation changes for him right now. So those are the guys that I look at, because even with Blake too, he's a co-leader with Andre Drummond, but nobody feels like they should be building their team around Andre Drummond. After the first couple years, that thinking has kind of went away as well.
It's funny. I know people are going to take how I say this maybe in the wrong context. And maybe, if per se any of these players listen to this show, they may take this in the wrong context. But to me, the easiest person that I feel like should be more of a secondary option, maybe sidekick, would wind up being John Wall. And this is no disrespect to John Wall, because John Wall is a premier point guard in the NBA.
But hold on, this is the guy I have to say. This is the guy I was most surprised to see on the list, right, in general. And I think DC Rising is going to be hella upset. when they see something like this too. So again, not to interrupt, but I'm very interested that, that's the guy that you peg as probably the one that fits the mold the most.
Okay, and here's part of my thought process in saying this. Usually when a player comes in and the franchise or the organization hasn't seen any success, right? And we can make the argument like the Washington Wizards clearly had not really seen a ton of success, even when they had Agent Zero, when they had Antoine Jameson, on their roster. People remember those better years when they were contenders to, in the playoffs. But I don't know if whether or not everybody had taken them completely seriously about making runs to the Eastern Conference Finals and getting to championships, right? When John Wall came around, he really changed the narrative. I think he changed the dynamic about how people should look at the Washington Wizards and their competitive nature in the NBA. We didn't talk too much about it because part of it was the fact he was injured a lot. And I think the other part of it too was this was a young kid coming out of Kentucky with a lot of upside. And even to Zach's point in the article, he says, Wall is a prodigious talent, right? So it's not like we're questioning the talent, but when you look at where the Washington Wizards had been and what they had gone through, even when they had John Wall, when Bradley Beal came on the scene, it almost seemed like it tempered down the idea or the possibility about John Wall being a number one guy, right? Like, aren't we talking about like, hasn't there been a stint numerous times in the past year or two because of John Wall's injury that we had been questioning whether or not the Washington Wizards were better off not having John Wall on the floor with Bradley Beal and the rest of the Washington Wizards? Like, does John Wall really make his team better? And I never want to question that with a guy as talented as John Wall. But I will question on whether or not we should put the burden on John Wall to be the cornerstone guy, to be the franchise guy. Because we're never going to put him in the same ilk as Steph Curry. We're never going to put him in the same ilk as James Harden or Russell Westbrook. And the argument can be made that he has tenure about as long as these guys have been. So one of two things is going to come from this. Either you're questioning that John Wall should really be a number one guy, or you're questioning whether or not John Wall should be someone that complements a team that has certain pieces that can help enhance his skill set again. But that to me is the reason why I feel like he's the most easiest to put into that bubble, because of the fact that everything that has happened over the last 3 or 4 years has not been something where we've questioned to elevate his circumstance. And very seldomly does that happen. Like, you can make that argument with Blake Griffin, but I really think that also we had been saying that Blake Griffin should have been like MVP. Now I'm also beginning to wonder, maybe because Blake Griffin and CP3 never got along, we never got the best of Blake Griffin either, even when he was injured. I don't know if you can make that same argument with John Wall, because he's had numerous opportunities to take this team by the horns, and it's just never materialized like that, even when he's healthy.
And I think that's exactly what he is. He is your Blake Griffin in some ways. Simply because
that's a good point. I even as I'm talking through this, which me, Shaw, I tend to do that. I completely see where that might fit in that narrative as well too.
Yeah, it's the end of the day, it's career arc. Listen, at some point we gave you a chance. You know what I mean? From a media lens, so to speak. It's like, all right, here's who you are, here's who we deem you to be, and now your body of work has shown, okay, you're not that. And maybe you're not ever going to be that. So now we have to readjust expectations as to what you can be and who you actually are. And again, I still think he's probably the most talented guy on this list. You could argue maybe that with DeMar DeRozan to some degree as well. But I see definitely where you're coming from because of the conversations that I have with Washington, where they sometimes do play better without him. But that was in the regular season. They weren't going anywhere in the playoffs without John Wall. Like, that just wasn't going to happen. But I also don't think they have a guy that's ready to step up in that mode as well too. And Bradley Beal, I like Bradley Beal, but he's not ready to be a franchise guy. So they just don't have it on that roster. So he also fits the mode of
right. No, and I agree with you, Shaw. I think where my point is that what Bradley Beal did was in essence water down the flow, the overflow of us giving those expectations to John Wall. We're kind of like, oh yeah, right, John Wall needs a sidekick. But in essence now, because of Bradley Beal, we're looking at John Wall kind of like, all right, well, you guys, like, You know what I mean? Like neither one of you guys have elevated to such a level or degree. Like you can make the argument about Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan when you look at these as
Exactly.
prospective talents.
That's exactly what they are.
Right, they came together and they elevated each other, even though it wasn't good enough to beat LeBron, the LeBron James led basketball teams. But with John Wall and Bradley Beal, both of these guys were high draft picks. Both of these guys were highly touted coming out of college. And in essence, where their skill sets were set, the idea was all right, Bradley Beal is coming in to complement John Wall, but because of Bradley Beal, we question John Wall more, which is really strange. And even to some degree, we're even now saying, Bradley Beal is the kind of guy, is the kind of shooter where maybe if he gets the ball more or it's more catered towards him, he could actually ascend or be better than it. It's not like we never questioned that during the parts of last season when John Wall was being injured.
Yeah, no doubt. And I feel like they are very much in the mold of like kind of when everyone talks about the best backcourts for lack of a better phrase outside of Golden State, well now even Houston, is that they're led by guys that kind of co-lead together. So look at Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, that situation. Some people don't feel like Dame is a guy that you should be building around. And there's conversations about whether or not he'd be traded and things of that nature as well, too. So they all fall into that, CJ and Dame, Wall and Beal, and then Lowry and DeRozan when they were together. So it's kind of like the pairs of those guys are kind of been the leaders of their respective franchises in some ways. But we're also now seeing that, maybe that isn't the way to go. And obviously Toronto now was broken up with DeRozan being in San Antonio.
All right, man. So the one person that I will say that provides the most interest, and I'm glad he added as part of his list, is Kemba Walker. And we didn't have an opportunity to talk about him. So let's get right into this. Kemba Walker to me is an interesting find for this type of conversation, because when I look at Kemba Walker and you look at his numbers, the guy has quality numbers. I mean, this is you could kind of make the argument, man, he's like a top 10 type point guard in the NBA, who has been maligned because of the franchise that he plays for and the inconsistency that tends to emerge when we talk about the Charlotte Hornets. But after a while, when you really look at the body of work of Kemba Walker, you too begin to start saying to yourself, like, maybe the intent was right when they got him and the thought process as far as what they were trying to do and build around him. But this is the kind of guy I feel like, when I look at his numbers, this is the kind of guy that I think Carmelo Anthony wish he really had when he was a Denver Nugget. To me, Kemba represents a younger version of a Chauncey Billups at times. And I feel like when Carmelo Anthony got Chauncey Billups, he got Chauncey Billups really on the back end of his career. And I feel like if Kemba Walker was that type of Chauncey Billups to Carmelo Anthony, this would be like the main crux of that type of conversation where we say Carmelo Anthony is that superstar dude. Everyone sees that, knows that, buys into that. And here a guy like Kemba Walker comes in and complements that essence of what Carmelo Anthony brings to the table. Like, that would have been a powerful duo. And to me would have justified the idea of a number one guy really being more of a sidekick. You think I'm off with that?
No, not at all. And I think Kemba is in a very unique situation, only because he wants to be in Charlotte for the duration of his career, and he wants, retire. And I'm sure he will be an all-time Hornet when all is said and done. And not necessarily writing him off. He's still got plenty of years left in the tank. But it would be interesting to see if he was in a different situation with other capable players. For the lack of a better phrase, I mean, you can arguably say that really he's on the most capable team, or he's playing with the best level of talent he's ever had right now, with Nicholas Batum as his proverbial sidekick. And again, I like Batum. I think he's versatile and all of that, but he's just not that guy.
It's so sad, Shaw. It's like we can't even consider Batum a sidekick.
Yeah, no. I mean, he's a
great
intern. Complimentary player.
He's like an intern, right? Like, so.
And then the combination of Kemba and Dwight Howard didn't work as well as people would have liked. Although Dwight didn't have a bad season, he played very well. And I think Kemba even elevated some of Dwight's play by being there. That just didn't work out the way that they all would have hoped it to be. So Kemba to me is definitely a guy who I think has the moxie to be a leader, who wants to take the shots, who can be a good locker room guy, and things of that nature. I don't know that his overall talent level is, it's not elite. Well, I know that. I know it's not elite. But what does that mean? Could he go somewhere else now and like you said, be a great number 2 option who can hit big shots and things of that nature? That'd be something to see. We'll see what ends up happening with Kupchak now in the fold, because we know Walker, I think his contract is coming up pretty soon, and they're gonna have to make a decision on him regardless.
All right. There was an interesting portion of Zach's article, which I want to read to kind of throw out to your point. He's a guy that he says, and I quote, he isn't a particularly efficient shooter. 41.5%, 35.8%, 83.4%. Career. He's somewhere in the 44th percentile. As far as shooting in isolation situations. And listen, these are things that are important. If you're going to be a number 1 guy, you've got to be able to hit clutch shots. You got to be able to get your own shot off. Kemba Walker, again, exciting player. He's played transient in the eras of where LeBron James and Kobe Bryant sit, right? So it's not like we don't have a sample size enough to say, well, Kemba Walker, can be better than or best than, where we put some of these guys in that particular light, even to a guy like, to your point, when you mentioned earlier, Paul George, right? So
yeah.
It's interesting how we look at some of these players, because you're going to have to make those type of comparisons. There's no way that you can avoid, when you have these guys that are on the bubble like that you have to tend to make the comparisons. Here's an interesting question for you, Shaw. Who has an opportunity or chance to elevate themselves from these to be a number 1 guy? Who, like, in our world of hoop redemption, who actually can be the number 1 dude?
I mean, I think you can look no further than the two talented guys on the list, and that's Wall and DeRozan. So DeRozan is going into a situation where he's hell bent on proving Toronto made a mistake, and he's going to be under the tutelage of Greg Popovich. So and San Antonio player development, and not to say that DeRozan is old, but it will be interesting to see how much more he can develop and what evolution San Antonio does take with his game, especially when he's going to be as motivated as he is. And then, as you just alluded to with John Wall, or a couple segments ago with John Wall, again, he has the talent to really be there. It's a lot of it is a mindset, and then just trying to elevate the guys around him. So I know he's been in the Miami era. He's been working out. I've been seeing a lot of videos of him doing his thing down here specifically, and he seems to be very focused in terms of trying to get better. So those are the 2 guys for me. And I'd kind of put them even based on their talent level and their current situations.
Yeah, I like DeMar DeRozan in this one, Shaw. Probably more so than John Wall. And I'm not saying I don't think John Wall can get himself to that point. I do think that maybe in it would probably have to be under a different circumstance. Probably maybe partly like they would have to move Bradley Beal, and then the reset button would have to be hit for us to be able to reevaluate, where John Wall truly should be or would be again. It's not like he's not old enough where that could happen, but I find that very hard to believe, because just of the fact that because Bradley Beal is on that team, it makes it difficult. And you look at the money situation with John Wall, you might be inclined to try and move John Wall a hell of a lot quicker than you try to move Bradley Beal. So then wherever it is that you may move John Wall to, certainly would then kind of X out the premise of saying that this dude is a number 1 guy, unless it's a team like maybe like the Memphis Grizzlies or something like that.
You talk about the Grizzlies. So, but there's an interesting, I think, tidbit in the piece from Zach that he actually took from Andrew Sharper and Sports Illustrated when it comes to Wall, and it's basically saying for the first time in Wall's career, he has as much downside as he has upside. Like, he's right in the middle of his career. You know what I mean? So it can kind of go this way, it can kind of go that way. We're not really quite sure, but when it comes to Wall right now. So I can definitely understand why you'd pick DeRozan maybe over John Wall in this situation, in terms of being the guy that could potentially be that dude. Two guys though, and I definitely want to get your opinion on this really quickly. Or more so than like if you have other guys out there, who did Zach potentially miss in this? I look at a guy like Devin Booker, and I look at Nikola Jokic as well too, as two guys who were putting up monster numbers on teams. Denver obviously being a better team than Phoenix. But are we sure those two players can be number one options leading your franchise? I think those are two guys that it would have been interesting to see. And I think Booker is going to get off the hook because he's such a darling. And so is Jokic in a lot of ways, too. They're just both media darlings. But are they really ready for that primetime spotlight and the pressure that comes with being number one option?
You can throw Kristaps Porzingis in this.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Right. I mean, right now he doesn't have enough of a sample size, but all signs point to the fact that he is going to be an exciting player in the NBA. I think that when again, it depends on what the criteria is and how we're structuring this, because you look at a franchise like the New York Knicks and they needed to get younger and they needed to put talent on the court. Is based on what you're seeing. Is Kristaps Porzingis, should he be a number one guy, or is he somebody that really should be considered as a sidekick? And I think that now with them drafting a Kevin Knox, with the speculations about a Kyrie Irving possibly coming out there, you're going to start re-raising those questions about where Kristaps Porzingis falls, on the totem pole of this. So, listen, if Kristaps Porzingis was that dude, even if a guy like Kyrie Irving comes over, he would concede to the fact that that's not his team. That would be Kristaps Porzingis' team. Jimmy Butler coming over would not, he would easily concede to Kyrie Irving if they were to play together. He would concede that Kyrie Irving would be the future and that he would kind of be the sidekick. Ain't nobody talking about Kristaps Porzingis at that time, right? And maybe if you're the New York Knicks and you're entertaining any of that, you might have to move Kristaps Porzingis. And I really think that when you look at the way that he plays still, he may actually be someone of a 1B, maybe a 2A type player for a basketball team, but we won't know that until he fully gets healthy and he has a full season under his belt.
Yeah, and I think that's the caveat really more than anything else. We just need to see it. Everyone was speculating, well, you're behind Carmelo, so you're not getting the touches, you're not getting the requisite attention that you needed. And then he was balling to begin last season. He tailed off a little bit before the injury. So, I don't want to disillusion people, and we're not Porzingis haters. I love the guy.
Yeah, I love Kristaps Porzingis, but what we're talking about is when you look at the way, because there's a distinction between Kristaps Porzingis and Dirk Nowitzki, which is where a lot of people want to go with this. Kristaps Porzingis is Dirk Nowitzki 2.0, and Dirk Nowitzki has already come out and said, I think that he's far ahead of the curve when I came into the NBA. And I kind of beg to differ that. I don't know. Maybe it's probably because Dirk was fortunate to be in a franchise that understood what they wanted from him and where he needed to be. But when Dirk Nowitzki got his opportunity, he did not relinquish or give you any indication or signs that he wasn't capable of holding that down. And that's part of what I'm still waiting to see with Kristaps. And again, it's really early, so I'm not going to put that on him just yet. But if we're going to have that kind of conversation, you're going to throw out those comparisons between him and Dirk Nowitzki. This is exactly the reason why you can go out and say Dirk Nowitzki is a number one guy. And any time the Cuban or whoever the GM was, Donnie Nelson and those guys, whenever they were going to go get someone, they were getting someone for Dirk Nowitzki. Right? We're not seeing that just yet for Kristaps Porzingis. We'll see, but we're not seeing that just yet.
Yeah, well, like I said, injuries aside, he's still a great talent, but you're right. We need to wait and see with KP, and hopefully he does develop into that guy that the Knicks hoping he's going to be alongside Fizdale and the rest of the young Fizz kids, as one of my friends like to say when it comes to the Knicks, brother.
All right, man. Woo, damn good discussion, man. And listen, we want to hear from you guys. We want to know your thoughts. Who do you think that's out there right now that is a number one option that probably should be considered a secondary option or sidekick? Let us know. Give us your thoughts. Be sure to hit us up at NBA Baseline. You're tuned to the Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was the breakdown. Time now for the drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. A couple of interesting topics to get into on the drop. And first things first, we knew it was coming at some point. Not that it was going to be drama-filled or anything like that, but we knew that, the days of us yelling out, Ginobili, would probably come to an end, at least from, an NBA perspective. And so that time is obviously come. 16 wonderful seasons. Really you can make the argument, one of the greatest international basketball players of our time. A champion, not just for the San Antonio Spurs organization, but also a champion for the Argentinian community. And listen, man, we can write a really long list and throw out accolades all day long when we talk about Manu Ginobili. The fact that he is retiring, though, you brought up a really good point, Shaw. This really felt like the end of an era. Um, you know, Created by the San Antonio Spurs, the architects, of greatness. And while we're going to be wishing great things for the San Antonio Spurs, you knew that at this point this was going to sting a little bit, simply because Manu's contributions to the game and really what he has done in elevating positions and embracing roles and the way that he contributed for his basketball team, really set some trends that we're now seeing, that we don't often get an opportunity to talk about, especially as it pertains to the association and where it is now with this relation to players and the elevation of players aligned to the NBA.
Man, marvelous career for Manu. Came into the league at age 25, retires at age 40, and really does signify the end of an era. Once you saw Tony Parker kind of go off to Charlotte and join those guys after Duncan retirement, and then Kawhi got traded, et cetera, et cetera. All that stuff happened for San Antonio. Ginobili had to be kind of looking around, you know what I mean? Like that Will Smith meme that they show on Fresh Prince all the time, just kind of looking around like, damn, it's just me. Nah, man, that's it. There's no reason for him to want it to have come back. There isn't, for lack of a better phrase, the same culture that he needs to try to pass on. It really is a true, just new time for the San Antonio Spurs, and he just didn't need to be a part of it. So it's interesting to say that he was able to be there for as long as he was. Another guy, when we talk about the course of his career, we talked about lifers and all that stuff a couple weeks ago. Just never really heard anything about Ginobili going anywhere else. And he had opportunities. There was plenty of interest, but it just never seemed like he was ever going to leave San Antonio. Interesting tidbit about him is 2 years where he really started the majority of games in a regular season. Both those years were the years he made all-star teams. So, look at this guy and see how great he truly was, because he could have complained, he could have bitched and moaned and say, hey, I need more minutes, I need to do this, but consummate team player, and was always willing to come off the bench no matter what situation San Antonio was in. And you can say he was better than a lot of the shooting guards or slashers that they've had on that roster, but he wanted to be in the backup role. But again, the 2 years where he started the majority of the games he played, at 04-05, started 74 games, played 74 games, and then 2010, 2011, played 80 games and started 79 of those games. Both times he was an all-star. So salute to Manu Ginobili, bro.
There's so many ways that you can kind of channel the thought process of Manu's, not just his contributions, but his work ethic. And it translates, like, Manu Ginobili in many ways challenged the narrative and in some respects of how there needs to be a balance in the way that we look at all stars. It shouldn't just necessarily be about popularity, right? And I think in some respects as well too, Manu Ginobili embraced, at a time where I think that sometimes we started to get a little too crazy with our connotations about what all-star players should represent and who they should be, and fans leaning over to other teams, players, and what I'm saying. San Antonio Spurs fans, to their heart, will probably say that Manu Ginobili should have been an all-star every single year. Because if the San Antonio Spurs are going to always be a top 3 team over the course, of the 16 years that he has played and participated with the San Antonio Spurs, if they're going to be a top 3 team, you are always going to say, wow, it shouldn't just be us talking about Tony Parker or Tim Duncan. Like it should always be us talking about Manu Ginobili, Tim Duncan, and Tony Parker. And that's what Manu Ginobili did. He actually, in many respects, and listen, this is to all of you six man for all your respective basketball teams, whether it's in the NBA, whether it's in college, whether it's in your high school, whether it's in your AAU leagues. You need to go and thank Manu Ginobili because Manu Ginobili changed the way that we look at the importance of the sixth man. He changed the way that we looked at how coaches should be able to utilize players, that sometimes it does not matter that you have to start or be a starter for you to get quote unquote paid. That you could be perfectly fine coming off the bench and doing things, remarkable things, putting up remarkable Hall of Fame like type numbers and not even be considered as a starter in the NBA and still have longevity in the NBA and win championships in the NBA.
I love what you're saying there, honestly, because it confuses me some when you look back at the list of accolades and you only see one Sixth Man of the Year award for Ginobili, like just one, and that's what we know.
Which I think is an absolute is and I'm calling it now. It's BS to me. It's straight up BS. Right? Like, we often do all of our little previews over the last few years, and we talk about these guys, Jamal Crawford. And to us, we're saying to ourselves, like, why aren't we ever talking about Manu Ginobili? And part of that reason is because year after year, Greg Popovich, clearly had to figure out a way, to be able to keep Manu Ginobili healthy. But yet Manu Ginobili was as effective as most of those other guys that we often talked about and previewed and had said, they're going to wind up getting the Sixth Man of the Year award. And let's also not forget too, when Manu Ginobili came into the NBA, he came in pretty old, like, he came in like his mid-20s or whatever, right? So he had already had a lot of, mileage on his body as far as playing international basketball before finally coming to the NBA. But even that being still, Manu Ginobili should always been a top 3 conversation as Sixth Man of the Year. And you look at the numbers, and I tell you, to me, it is absolute BS that we never took that seriously if we're going to continue to elevate these kind of conversations for guys that come off, that are Sixth Man of the Year nominees, so to speak.
Right. It's just one of those things. You just kind of go about your NBA life, so to speak, and your analysis of it. And I feel ignorant as a fan right now and as an analyst to realize he only won one. I would have said he at least won 2, maybe even 3. But that actually goes to Jamal Crawford. So I think it's an interesting question. I think we'll even put it out there. Who people think of our generation, who's probably the best sixth man that they've seen. And although Crawford has the quote unquote awards, and is a very, very likable guy, Crawford's played for a bunch of different teams and franchises. Well, Ginobili did it for one team, for his entire career, and really is like the quintessential sixth man. When I think about the sixth man, I think of Ginobili, and I'm not dissing Jamal Crawford. Jamal Crawford's a great dude, and I'm not trying to turn it into pitting against these two guys, but it's just interesting to me that Ginobili hasn't really been rewarded, I think, publicly in that way, or at least with the hardware, so to speak, because I think his perception of him is still very, very high regardless.
Yeah, and this is part of the reason why this is where we fall in our perception of doing a tribute, to Manu Ginobili. And I was reading, the other thing is that Manu Ginobili's contributions as a player also transcended even into other sports where basketball is being loved and embraced equally as within their own sport. Like I'm just reading an article not too long ago where Lionel Messi also paid tribute to Manu Ginobili, right? Messi, international football star, one of Argentina's heroes, okay? But let's talk about it, right? While in Argentina, football is the sport, you could also make the argument as well, too, that Manu Ginobili and Juan Martín del Potro, who is a tennis superstar, tennis and football usually would be more popular than basketball. Manu Ginobili gave Argentina a platform to be talked about in the international conversation of basketball. Manu Ginobili essentially helped elevate Argentina as a new foundation, a new place where the NBA can go and find talent. He became that. He became the centrist of that model for that, right? And that to me says something. When a player like Manu Ginobili can elevate a country to be looked at as a place where basketball can be played and where talent can be looked at and evaluated and taken seriously, that is a remarkable accomplishment. And again, these are things that are not may or may not be mentioned, when he gets into the Naismith Hall of Fame, but it is things that you should take into consideration about the greatness of what Manu did in the 16 years that he played in the NBA.
Yeah, and I won't dispute any of that. I mean, I think that's a great point. Really brought a lot of honor and joy to his country, to international players alike, and just one of those universally well-liked dudes kind of around the league. And again, he was eccentric, man. He would do some things that you just can't imagine sometimes, and he would try some things you wouldn't imagine that obviously got pop upset. And but they just understood, like, hey, this dude, he's gonna come here and this is how he's gonna play. And the immortal words of how we say let Westbrook be Westbrook, you had to let Manu be Manu. And he would take over games. And one of his teammates, I'm forgetting which one right now because I just heard it kind of in passing, but there were times where he would just look and say, he'd see the game flow and understand, okay, this what needs to get done. I'm going to do it. And that's even with Tony Parker and Duncan there. And he's like, no, I'm going to go ahead and get this done and take it upon himself. And it wasn't a matter of being cocky. It wasn't a matter of being disrespectful to the stars that, quote unquote, have more talent than him, or even to Pop as a coach. He just understood what needed to be done, and how his team needed him to kind of step up in those moments. And that's kind of what made him so great.
Yeah, look, this is my, final thought with reference to Manu Ginobili. Like, well, we can throw out numbers, that's all well and good, but we know you guys can read, so we always encourage you, go to your favorite sports website or sports analytical website, and you can pull up the numbers. I don't think anyone's ever going to question Manu Ginobili and the numbers that he's put up, that he's going to be Hall of Fame worthy. I will say that with Manu Ginobili, there's going to be an interesting conversation post his retirement, and I think that conversation is where will the role of the sixth man be? Usually when guys walk away from the game, you can very easily see who's going to kind of pick up the slack, right? Who's going to carry the mantle moving forward. And Manu Ginobili uniquely placed himself where, you could make the argument that there'll never be another Manu Ginobili, right? Like, I don't know if whether or not you're going to find anyone right now in the current gamut of NBA players that are representing quote unquote the sixth man role, quite like how Manu Ginobili did it. Because not only did Manu Ginobili have a unique way of scoring the basketball, have a unique way of hitting clutch shots when it mattered the most, Manu Ginobili had a unique way of playing defense. Manu Ginobili had a, to kind of, throw out the Spanish connotation. He was a matador out there. Okay. Where, he can dance around. He could do so many different things. And I don't see that from today's guys. I see a lot of guys really trying to carve their niche in their offensive capabilities and their offensive repertoire. But very seldomly do I see guys seem to carry that on both sides of the court. And then the other interesting too is, most guys get too comfortable in that sixth man of the year role. Too comfortable, to the point where it's like some coaches don't have any confidence of wanting to start them with the first unit, that they are so better suited playing for the second unit, and they minimize the versatility of what these guys might be capable of. We've always known that maybe in most cases Manu should be a starter for other teams. Like, damn, they could have sure used Manu in that situation. But very seldomly nowadays are you seeing that kind of versatility in guys where you have the confidence that you want to put them up there with your number ones and still feel like they can leave them with their number twos and maybe even their number threes. I really think that, something is going to be said that when Manu walks away from the court, we're going to start really questioning and scrutinizing some of these six men a lot more. Maybe because Manu was there, he gave those guys safe passage. But now I think it's going to be a different way that it's going to be interesting how we look at these guys differently moving forward.
Well, yeah, he revolutionized, that title in a lot of ways. Like I said, as I outlined a little bit earlier, just never complaining, and being the role. And again, very easy to point. 2 years where he started, was an all-star, but that didn't matter. It was about team success. So he's a multi-time champion as a result of it. He is a multi-time all-star as a result as well too. But just a great overall career. So like, one more final time, salute to Manu Ginobili. Best wishes on you, whatever you decide to do next. Whether that's stay in the States, you go abroad, you go touring around with Boris Diaw, or whatever the case may be. I think Manu is going to be in great hands, and just hope his family and his loved ones get to really embrace him for the final years.
All right, Shaw, let's go ahead and get right into that other topic of conversation. The Houston Rockets finally did something with Ryan Anderson, man. I feel so bad for this dude. I think he's like in the shower singing like, "Think you gonna let me go?" So finally the Rockets decided to trade him. They also moved DeAnthony Melton to Phoenix, and the Phoenix Suns wind up getting Brandon Knight and Marquise Chris. So, part of our conversation of a week ago, Shaw, about where Marquise Chris had fallen in that conversation of what will come of some of these guys. Listen, I can tell you this right now, man. I don't know where he fits in the fold of the Houston Rockets and the roster importance, but it doesn't help because I'm sure that D'Antoni will use Brandon Knight a heck of a lot more than he'll use Marquise Chris.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like they wanted to get off of Ryan Anderson's contract, but then they took the 2 years of Brandon Knight, left on his deal. So it just depends. It just goes to show where they feel like somebody can help them. And you're right. I do think they feel like Knight can be somebody who can help, but there's still not going to be a lot of minutes for that guy there, and they still have Eric Gordon as well too. So I think Knight is probably, although Knight's been injury prone, as we all know, he's a Chris Paul insurance, I guess, in some ways, as Paul continues to age and, always has his nagging injuries as well. It's a very interesting move, I think, for both teams. And obviously, I think with Chris, he had some personality issues in Phoenix, didn't always have just the right attitude when it came to his own development. So that's why, while many people would think Chris is more talented than Dragan Bender is, so to speak, that seems to be why they went ahead and moved Chris in the deal they did. And they get Ryan Anderson now. Ironically, I was making a joke with one of our colleagues that the Suns now have 40% of the Rockets starting lineup from last year with Ariza and Anderson both on this team. And those guys are going to be looked to be veteran leaders to help some of the young players on this team and roster. But it is interesting that, Chris was the one to go and Bender is still on this roster. Whether or not he stays on this roster, we still don't know. The thing I need to touch on, though, even outside of the Houston standpoint, is now they have a gaping hole in Phoenix in terms of that point guard situation. Okobo, who they drafted, is there. Shaquille Harrison is there. They brought back Isaiah Cannon and Melton contend for that point guard situation. But a lot of people are starting to think maybe they're going to play Booker at the one a lot like they did towards the middle part of last season, which I don't love at all. So Woj is reporting that they're still very interested in trying to get guys like somebody we talked about earlier, Kemba Walker, and maybe bring Walker out into that situation in Phoenix. But they're very, very they're steadfast in their pursuit of trying to get another point guard out in Phoenix.
Yeah, I mean, what more can be said? Phoenix continues to, give us a circus.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely see. A final point here on Houston is, you look at that point guard situation. Chris Paul, elite, but injury prone. Brandon Knight, good, but injury prone. Michael Carter-Williams, maybe not so good, but also injury prone. So three kind of broken down guys in some ways. And, they really are just kind of hedging their bets that two of those three hopefully stay healthy throughout the duration of the season. And Chris, he's slotted right now to potentially be obviously the backup 4 and the 5. We'll see what that ends up looking like, how many minutes he actually gets moving forward. I really think, and not because their names are similar, but I think Chris could be Marcus Morris type. You know what I mean? Just as a guy who can play a little bit physical, can do a little bit of everything, if he just can get his mind right. And I hope that works out for them in some way in Houston, some form or fashion.
All right. Well, there you have it, man. My man Ryan, he's finally moved along, man. We can finally stop. Ryan Watch is finally over. We can get back to Overwatch. No more Ryan Watch. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cali, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop.
Coast to coast. Coast to coast.
Time to go coast to coast discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
Hey, man, you didn't put this in our list of coast to coast, man. David West walking away from the game, announces his retirement. Best of luck to our man. I'm gonna kind of miss the dude.
Yeah, for sure. David West is an ultimate professional. Everybody around the league loves him and what he does, not just even on the basketball court, but he's just a guy who's given so many players life skills, and he'd say he's just a talented individual who just understands, how to maneuver and how to be a man. So the league is definitely going to miss David West, and hopefully he'll be around in some other form of capacity where we'll still get to interact with him a little bit.
Hey, much respect too, man. Out of Teaneck, New Jersey, it's a stone's throw away from my side, man. I'm sure the community of Teaneck is definitely proud of his accomplishments, and David West, a great career, man. I mean, bulldog out when he was with the New Orleans Hornets, man. Crazy. All right, Shaw. Los Angeles Lakers have finally reached a buyout with Luol Deng, so that probably means that Luol Deng will be on Instagram a hell of a lot more than he already has been at this point.
I mean, it's a big win, I think, for both parties. Deng, if he wants to continue his career in the NBA as somebody else's bench as a veteran presence, he will be able to do that. Whether he goes overseas or whether he retires, we don't know. But Lakers are the biggest winners in this, freeing up $30 million in roughly in change of tax of salary for next season, continuing to make their bids for all the big name free agents that will be available in 2019.
All right, the Philadelphia 76ers are continuing their GM search. I mean, a lot of people are already very much aware of the craziness that's happened in the offseason with their president of basketball operations having to resign. Where do we see this as far as how the 76ers move forward? They're in a really great place as being one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. Clearly, whatever they do from a GM perspective, it's going to be important over the next couple of seasons to maintain what they're doing.
Right, and I think a lot of it is because they just have the requisite talent in Embiid and Simmons on their roster as is, but some things kind of got fumbled. Obviously, they lost Aliyah Sobo, they lost Bellinelli. They had that weird situation with Bjelica coming and then deciding he's going overseas and end up in Sacramento of all places. So some things that I guess they wish they could have handled better, and maybe I'm not blaming Brett Brown specifically, but had a better structure been in place, it would have been better suited to maybe handle some of these things. So I'm kudos to them for finally trying to get that under wraps now that the summer is quote unquote ending, and they can get some continuity going into the regular season.
All right, and finally, Shaw, Glenn Big Baby Davis, he's actually looking at his options overseas to play basketball. I guess all of that hype, man, winning that championship with the Big Three got him amped up, man, has rejuvenated his career.
Yeah, he's been wanting to come back for a while, as well as Nate Robinson, as they both do. But Big Baby may have to go overseas, as we alluded to, and maybe he does find a way to come back and be an impactful guy. Again, coming off in a reserve role of playing maybe 10 to 12 minutes a night, I'm sure he understands where he's at in his career right now and is just looking for the opportunity to get back.
All right, well, there you have it, man. A lot of good stuff going on in the NBA. Great show, Shaw, and I really like that conversation. Kudos to you, man, for coming across the article written by Zach Buckley. And once again, we encourage people to go and check out the article on Bleacher Report. His name is Zach Buckley, great writer. Again, it's an interesting way for us to kind of look at some of the players, as they're entering in this upcoming season, because now it's more than just scrutinizing how well these teams are. It's also scrutinizing on the perception of where these guys are as being number one players, number one options. So I really think it was a great topic.
Well, man, shout out to Zach for making it, and I just, it's one of the things that have to be on Twitter when it posted and caught my eye, and I was like, wow, this is interesting. So I think we'll maybe do a little bit more of that for this upcoming season. At times where maybe we'll pick out some articles, that is out there in Twitter and social media, wherever the case may be, and see how we can dissect that a little bit and maybe bring those writers on. But as always, shout out to all our partners, Almighty Ballers. And of course, Dash Radio, Nothing But Net. And it's about that time, man. NBA season coming up. Let's get some gear. Hit us up, TeePublic. Let's search the Baseline NBA Podcast T-shirt. Rock it. We got some social media stuff coming your way, fellas. Ladies and gentlemen, I should say. So it's going to be a great NBA season, man. I'm very, very excited to get this thing going.
Definitely. So keep us locked. Keep us tuned. We're going to give you the goods, baby, and get you ready for this upcoming NBA season as always. For the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. We do. We'll catch up with you next time.